Hi, I'm Nathan from Serious Geeks, and before I carry on with this Tactica video, I just want to say thank you all for waiting so patiently. Real life has kind of moved aside now, so I can go back to the passion of my hobby. So without further stalling for time, here comes the next video. Today's Tactica is going to cover the humble Space Marine Dreadnought. In this, I will also include the Venerable Dreadnought, since they are very much similar in their role and operation on the tabletop. Where do we start? As always, we start with the stat line. The stat line for both the Venerable Dreadnought and the Standard Dreadnought are very similar, both of which have a movement of 6. The Standard Dreadnought has a weapon skill, ballistic skill of 3+. The Venerable Dreadnought has a 2+ for both of those, and then each of them have a strength of 6, toughness 7, which is fairly standard for vehicles, wounds 8, which is a little bit low, but that is actually a boon for these vehicles. 4 attacks, which is very nice, especially when you have a Dreadnought close combat weapon of some sort. And they have a leadership of 8, which is standard for most vehicles and most Space Marine vehicles in that regard. And a 3+ armor save. Now, when we consider the stat line, it's a fairly good stat line for both vehicles. And it's fairly survivable. It's not brilliant. Toughness 7 and 8 wounds will go down to concentrated fire fairly quickly. But with the addition of obscuring terrain 40k, and other more threatening units that may be on the table, you can guarantee that your Dreadnoughts can at least operate with a little bit of impunity, especially with one of their special rules later on, which means they get to actually get on the table and do some damage and last long enough to actually be effective. Crucially, both the Venerable Dreadnought and the Standard Dreadnought are fairly cheap for what you actually get on the table. They come in at less than 150 points each when they have their weapons included on top of that, and that's not too bad. Indeed, the Standard Dreadnought is a very effective, cheap weapons platform that you could use to support an army, and it just adds an extra couple of las cannon shots into the army if that's what you need, etc. In a little bit of contrast to the Redemptor Dreadnought, these Dreadnoughts are not going to be mainstay frontline units. They're going to be more of a support unit alongside your frontline units. They can operate up close, because we will talk about it later, but they have duty eternal. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be taking all the damage and hits from the opponent. What they are very good at doing is being a utility unit, and you can equip them with all manner of weapons. Traditionally, they start with an assault cannon. That's always been the standard. Whenever you think Dreadnought, I often would think back in my 2nd edition days when I was a kid, I'd have the lead Dreadnought, which is actually a lethal weapon in its own right. Very heavy. It would have the assault cannon, and it looked brilliant, and it was just a marvellous weapon to fire. And in this edition, it's an okay weapon system, range of 24, heavy 6, strength 6, -1 AP. It's an anti-infantry predominantly weapon. It's not going to be great against Space Marines, which is a little bit of a problem in today's meta at the moment, because a lot of people do take nothing but Space Marines, which are 2 wounds apiece. But going forward, I'm pretty sure we'll see a lot more usage of Horde units, so the assault cannon is a nice little weapon to get a decent amount of shots on the opponent as you advance forward. It goes without saying that having an assault cannon generally pairs quite well with a Dreadnought close combat weapon, simply because you've got to be getting up close anyway and you're just peppering people with shots, so it's a nice little addition for your main combat role of close combat. Whereas if you wanted something more predominantly powerful, like an anti-tank weapon, you might not want to get as close. So moving on to that, we have the Dreadnought close combat weapon. It's quite nice. It's strength ×2, which is going to put it up to strength 12. Still only going to be damaging most vehicles on a 3+, but that's still not too bad. -3 AP and 3 damage apiece. 3 damage apiece is kind of the standard, and it means that when you come up against heavy Gravis armor and stuff like that, you're going to be killing these heavy infantry models in one blow, which is actually a real boon in today's game. It's, you're going to see a lot of heavy infantry. You've got Scorpec destroyers, you've got Blightlord Terminators, you've got things that you're going to want to put extra wounds on. Of course, Blightlord Terminators have -1 to the wounds, but that means that any damage to weapons are obviously going to struggle. So having a 3 damage means that you're a bit more consistent, and you can kind of plan for how much damage you're doing a little bit better than if you have more of a swingy D6 damage weapon. Space Wolves, well, they are special snowflakes. They can have a Great Wolf Claw, which is a slightly weaker version. It's only strength 10 instead of strength 12, but it does allow you to reroll wounds, which is quite valuable if you want to be tearing into people when if you roll a lot of ones like I do. That's going to be great. It's only -2 AP, but it's still damage 3, so it's still fairly powerful, and it means that you can get those extra wounding damaging hits on vehicles. So that's not too bad. That's for the standard Dreadnought. The Venerable Dreadnought, of course, has slightly more. If it's a Space Wolf, it has access to a Fenrisian Great Axe. It only gets access to this if it takes a Blizzard Shield, so you're taking a dedicated close combat monster here. Blizzard Shields are 4+ invulnerable saves, which really do increase the survivability of a Venerable Dreadnought, and the Fenrisian Great Axe is very powerful. Its main attack, which is Strength +4, so again it gets the Strength 10, -3 AP, D3 damage +3 damage apiece. So that's a very consistent weapon. It does only hit on a -1, but you're already hitting on a 2+ anyway, so that's not too bad. Essentially like a Power Fist in that regard, but it's very consistent. Now the other profile on this weapon is Scythe, means that Strength user, Strength 6, -3 AP, but each time an attack is made with it, you make 2 hit rolls instead of 1. Doubles your attacks. So essentially you're going to be having 4 to 10 attacks, depending on whether you charge, so it's the first round of combat. That's a lot, and that's going to cut through chaff quite nicely. Now, while we're talking about these Dreadnought close combat weapons, they often come with a supplement weapon. The Dreadnought close combat weapon comes with a Stormbolter as standard, but you can replace it with a Heavy Flamer. Now, Heavy Flamers are quite good in this edition, simply because you only have to have a range of 12, but the Dreadnought is fairly slow. So I would probably normally lean towards going for the cheaper option, which is the Stormbolter, and just advancing and firing at 24 inches. And if you get closer, then you can obviously double tap and get 4 shots apiece, which adds quite nicely to a Stormbolter alongside an assault cannon anyway. The other weapon systems that this model can have is a missile launcher in replacement to a Dreadnought close combat weapon. This is usually done when people have a twin-link las cannon, and it becomes a nice little artillery piece for the back of the table to put a lot of damage on the opponents at range. You've basically got 3 weapons that are going to be doing D6 damage, which is quite nice, and it's a decent fire support platform. If you're not taking the missile launcher, you can still consider the twin-link las cannon, because as you advance, you're putting 2 twin-link las cannon shots across the table, and that increases your anti-tank. In a similar way, if you're advancing forward with a Dreadnought close combat weapon, consider the Multimelter. I mean, Multimelters are very useful, and once you get up close, that thing is going to be lethal. We all know that, and it's still 2 shots, so you're not losing out much compared to the twin-link las cannon. Finally, the Heavy Plasma Cannon. I'm not the biggest fan of this weapon system. It just feels like a lot of things could be done a lot easier with it. You know, there's other weapons out there that work quite nicely, and if you need anti-heavy infantry firepower, then there's probably other options. So I'm not the biggest fan of the Heavy Plasma Cannon. It's a nice little addition, but take a Redemptor if you want it. I mean, it's much better on a Redemptor anyway. The Heavy Plasma Cannon would be a lot better if it wasn't just D3 shots, but therein is the problem. You want it to be able to do a lot of damage against heavy infantry. It does come stock with 2 damage apiece, which is nice. It's, you know, it's a nice weapon system to have, because you're always going to be hurting heavy infantry with it. But heavy D3 isn't very good, so I'm not the biggest fan of it, to be honest. I mean, it does enable you to kill super heavy infantry in the form of Gravis armor. If you overcharge, you won't destroy the whole model if it goes wrong, and it's damage 3 apiece at strength 8, which isn't bad. But again, I feel like D3 shots, it's just not really worth it. Consider that you can take a Multimelter and do 2 shots and likely kill your target anyway, or even a twin-link las cannon, you're going to be likely killing your infantry anyway. So if it was D6 shots or D3 +1, it would be worthwhile, but right now, D3 shots, the Heavy Plasma Cannon just doesn't factor in for me. So that's the weapon systems covered. I generally lean to one way or the other. Either have the long range firepower of a twin-link las cannon and missile launcher, or forgo the las cannon, forgo the missile launcher, and go close combat weapon, and then a more close range weapon, which is generally cheap, like an assault cannon. That is generally where I'll go with it. If you're a Space Wolf, you might want to go all in on the melee, Fenrisian Great Axe, and a Blizzard Shield, and who would blame you? It's a pretty cool concept, and you want to get stuck in with those. Checking out the abilities, they of course have Angels of Death, which we know is quite useful, particularly for shock assault. Gaining an additional attack for a model that only has 4 attacks base, which is not bad, but you know, if you're a big dreadnought, then that's not going to be doing a lot when you're swamped with orcs. But getting the additional attack is very useful. and it's really good when you're fighting heavy infantry or large targets, because you're potentially doing an extra 3 damage with that Power Fist. Well, Dreadnought Close Combat Weapon. Sorry, they used to be called Power Fists back in 2nd edition, so it's hard not to go that way. The other special rule that is common to both types of Dreadnought is the Duty Eternal rule, which each time an attack is made allocated to this model, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of that attack. That is very good. It means this relatively soft and easy to kill model isn't so easy to kill. It's got 8 wounds, which you might think you'd be able to torrent them off the board using heavy bolters and stuff, but you're going down to 1 damage apiece. Power Fists, they're doing 1 damage against one of these things, and it means your Blizzard Shield and your 4+ invulnerable for your Venerable Dreadnought, if you're a Space Wolf player, is a lot more valuable, because it means the big hits, you've got 50-50 chance of really ignoring them, and the opponent can't torrent you very easily either, so it's very good. It's a nice little rule. It works great for Death Guard, so it will work great for Dreadnoughts. Having used it, I can't complain at all. I thought it was amazing. It also means, alongside obscuring terrain and target saturation with other threats, and the fact that you might have several Dreadnoughts, it makes the opponent quite concerned of how he's going to deal with Dreadnoughts. And melter weapons firing at Dreadnoughts are not firing at your more heavier targets or moving into dangerous positions. They're going to the front line where your infantry can engage them, and it kind of neuters them against artillery pieces or tanks that you might have in the background. So it's a very nice little option. Alongside that, the Venerable Dreadnought has Unyielding Ancient, which means each time they lose a wound on a roll of a 6, that wound is not lost. I don't roll 6s very well for that, but if you can save a couple of 6s alongside Duty Eternal, you can really make your Dreadnought last quite a long time, and that's quite handy. Lastly, these things explode. It's kind of understandable, we expect them to explode. Unlike some larger vehicles, these are fairly modest explosions on a dice roll of a 6. Each unit within 3 suffers 1 mortar wound, which is not too bad. It means that you're not going to, if they get taken out early and then they explode, you're not going to worry about losing loads of Space Marines to them alongside them. So it's alright. It's not too bad. Lastly, we'll check out the faction keywords. Imperium, Adeptus Astartes, Chapter. It's kind of standard. Now they have Vehicle, Smokescreen, Dreadnought, and Venerable Dreadnought, in the sense of the Venerable Dreadnought has both of those. But they also have Core, which is absolutely delicious when it comes to a vehicle, and it really boosts up Dreadnoughts, especially for frontline fighting. So having Core keyword allows us to move on to what units can support this quite nicely. Lieutenants, Captains, they give you the rerolls of 1s, which are very nice on hits and wounds respectively. That's very useful if they can take advantage of that. Rerolling 1s is always good, especially if you roll as many 1s as I do, and it means that you can factor in your Dreadnoughts moving up the table alongside your infantry, and you're all getting the same benefit. Similarly, you can take advantage of Chaplains. They have the Core keyword, therefore they can take some of the bonuses. Recitation of Focus, that's a really good one. Add 1 to the attacker's hit roll. Canticle of Hate, 2 to charge rolls, means that your Dreadnought is more likely to get in. Imagine being a Space Wolf Dreadnought and wanting to get into close combat. Catechism of Fire, +1 to your ranged attack wound rolls. Again, that's really delicious. It means that you can do a number on certain targets with your weapons. When you would normally be wounded on a 3 and now wounded on a 2, it's very good. It means that your artillery pieces, if they're up close, or your melter weapons, if they're up close, can really take advantage of the fact that they've got a chaplain nearby. It's going to catch people unawares. Highly recommend Chaplains anyway, but you might be using them for larger units to take advantage of these buffs. Don't forget that you can take advantage of a Chaplain with a Dreadnought and then use those heavy weapons where you need them. Example of this might be, you say you have 10 Assault Intercessors and they're about to mop up a unit of, say, 3 Guardsmen. You don't really need to use Exoration of Rage for the +1 to wound. Give Catechism of Fire instead to your Dreadnought, which means that it can wound that vehicle on a 2+ with its melter attacks. So yeah, you have a lot of options there, and it's nice to have that kind of toolkit available. The Librarian, of course, that does help Dreadnoughts a little bit. Psychic Fortress means that your Dreadnought can take advantage of a 5+ invulnerable save. Good if you haven't got a Blizzard Shield, and it's handy to keep a Dreadnought alive a little bit longer, especially alongside Duty Eternal. In a similar way, Chapter Core, Dreadnoughts being a core unit, Might of Heroes can really help out a Dreadnought because it can give it +1 strength, toughness and attacks, makes them more survivable. Toughness 8 is great. I mean, I would probably use it for a slightly larger vehicle, such as a Redemptor, or an ironclad, or maybe a contemptor, but strength toughness +1 is very good, and an extra pip on your attack means that you're doing even more damage. That extra attack does a lot more when you have a damage 3 weapon, so it's really useful on a Dreadnought, depending on what your options are. Lastly, the character that buffs this unit the most, Primaris Tech Marine, the normal Tech Marine, they can heal it, always good. They can also grant it +1 to hit, which again isn't bad, and it can really help out that vehicle. Of course, you're probably going to want to use your Tech Marine, because you haven't got a lot of Tech Marines, but you want to use your Tech Marine on something like a Redemptor, something bigger. But if he's on the front line and he's available to fix that vehicle, fix that Dreadnought, do so. If he's able to buff that Dreadnought by giving it Awaken the Machine Spirits, do it. It's definitely worth it in that regard. Now, if we check out what other things really help out a Dreadnought, Smokescreen, that's very good. It's a stratagem, so you can't use it across the board on all your vehicles at the same time, but if you have a Dreadnought you want to get into position, giving it a -1 to hit alongside Duty Eternal and whatever other benefits you might give it Might of Heroes to give it +1 toughness, you might also give it Psychic Fortress to give it 5 up and vulnerable save. You're basically creating a vehicle that is going to be a lot more survivable on the way in, which means it can get into melee range. The beauty of Smokescreen is, unlike previous editions where you would have similar sort of abilities, it doesn't affect the unit's ability to shoot on the way in. It's now done in the opponent's turn, which is very nice, and it's reflective of what the opponent's doing, so you can make your choice as and when you need to. The other very notable stratagem that does actually really help Dreadnoughts is Wisdom of the Ancients. It's an as and where you need to do it. Say you don't want a captain, but you want to support that attack force, well, you use Wisdom of the Ancients and your Dreadnought is now a quasi-captain. He can give them reroll to 1s to other core units. And if he himself is a core unit, and it doesn't say he can't give it to himself, which means he will also have the benefit of it. So for 1 command point, you can either count as a lieutenant or a captain for that turn with a particular Dreadnought in the right position, save you points on taking captains or lieutenants, and it means that you can fill up on other characters. It's a nice little stratagem, and it's a nice little opportunity to use. It also means you can spread out. If you have a captain on the front lines and you have a Dreadnought that's at the back with its long-range weapons, say next to a Devastator squad, and you want to boost up the Devastator squad, well, you can now do so with the benefit of Wisdom of the Ancients and not have to babysit them with a captain. So again, that's another very important way of playing the game. Overall, I'm a big fan of Dreadnoughts, and I think this edition has given them a leg up. They needed the extra survivability from the Duty Eternal special rule, and because of obscuring terrain, it means they have a little bit more chance of surviving on the table. Hyper-competitive lists, they are a utility unit that can support other factors of your army, and they won't be there to win you games, but they will help you contribute into what you need to do. In less competitive settings, or just more casual, but still fairly competitive, depending on how you want to play, they're going to do a lot for you. They'll do a lot of work. They can go toe-to-toe with a lot of heavy infantry with close combat weapons, and they can provide you with decent fire support. They work really well alongside intercessors and tactical marines, marching up the table together. So it's highly recommended in that regard to pair them up, or to have, say, 2 tactical squads and a Dreadnought. That is a very effective fighting force. Intercessors that don't have access to special weapons all of a sudden are going to have their big brother Dreadnought there. They haven't got the big one, which is a Redemptor, but they might have a slightly smaller one, which is saving you points, spreading the points around the table. So I really recommend both these units, either as artillery platforms or a melee support unit with close combat weapons and close range weapons, and adding them to most lists. So fill your boots with Dreadnoughts. They look great, and I hope you enjoyed this Tactica. It's good to be back, guys. I hopefully speak to you all soon. Peace out.